I have this much to say by way of introduction. Bill did endorse me, and among the conservatives of my district, his endorsement had the same enormous, resounding impact as his position on the Panama Canal has had in this convention. So I have a sense of participating in a program built on coalitions. I always have felt that Henry Kissinger is one of the greatest coalition builders in America. He quite accurately points out that he united you and me on at least some issues, mostly centering about him. And when I realized I was to speak tonight, I asked what had Henry Kissinger done to prepare for this occasion, since I knew that we had to come to this, each of us from somewhat difficult circumstances considering the nature of the audience. And I was told that what he'd been doing was to study up by going to all the movies he could see for as long as he could go to movies, but that he had skipped two. One was All the President's Men because he was afraid he'd recognize Deep Throat. The other was Deep Throat because he was afraid he'd recognize All the President's Men. Now, I've been sitting here listening to all these reminiscences, and they took me back to Yale, to which I also went. And I remember the Yale of the ideological purity that Stan Evans was describing. It was the time when Yale was described as having a football team which was so good that not even the Yale backs could get through the Yale line. But as I listened to Stan discuss his movement to the right and thought about what that meant, I realized that what it meant that while he was at Yale, he was devoted to Senator McCarthy's goals and his methods, but that in the time since then, as has been pointed out to me, he's abandoned the notion that the goals were right and is deeply dedicated still to the methods. I suppose it's fair to say that Bill Buckley, as much as anybody, reminds us that you can teach an old dogma new tricks. That there are times when people, out of the universality of their concern for this country and for the principles that unite people past their divisions, that there is a place in our life to cross these trenches from which we come and unite in saluting those few people who by quality and character and courage deserve it. And so when I was asked to come here tonight, I remembered an argument I had with Zorin in Geneva at the Human Rights Commission when we were for the first time discussing human rights in the Soviet Union in a UN body, which was a situation in which I think I was about as much part of the general flow of things as I would be here tonight if we discussed other things. And Zorin got quite indignant. You know, in the Human Rights Commission, you sit there with the Minister of Justice of Uganda on one side of you and the Soviet ambassador next to him, and you know that you've come to a place in which human rights are certainly the logical topic. Anyway, he became quite exercised and said that I was destroying daytime right there. I must say that I thought that was slightly exaggerated. I said that I thought Americans would go on and join the Bolshoi and the Soviet Union would do our little number in space together, and Podgorny and Brezhnev would go on wearing their American pacemakers right next to their Soviet hearts. Right? But anyway, as the discussion became more heated, I finally said to him, you know, in the Congress of the United States we have a saying, which is that you can disagree without being disagreeable. And the Soviet interpreter looked at me and said, I can't translate that into Russian. I told him to try Polish. But Bill, when he was an ambassador, wrote this. This is from the best book ever written on the United Nations, which I require my classes to read, so I hope that everyone here has read it. He reports that he was introduced at a luncheon by Mrs. Loeb, the New York City Commissioner for the UN, who rose smiling and said, that Mr. Buckley should answer questions, one of which was, how did he plan to vote in the New York City election, which was then about to occur? You see, all things go around in cycles. And he said, to tell you the truth, I have not studied the question because I can divulge in good conscience that I don't have to vote since I vote in Connecticut. Mrs. Loeb, he reports, rose smiling and said, you see, Mr. Ambassador, in America we don't vote where we work, we vote where we sleep. Well, says Mr. Buckley, even that is not exactly correct. If I voted where I slept, I would vote in the United Nations. And what I wanted to say about all of this meeting and all of these things that all of us are part of is that the great quality that through Yale, through the CIA, through his enormous exertions as a writer, as a candidate, as a critic, as an admirer of chamber music, as a person that speaks his mind under difficult circumstances wherever he feels called upon to do so, Bill brings to me what Solzhenitsyn talked about when he said that the salvation of mankind lies only in making everything the concern of everyone. Because if there is a person that I know who has brought to his life that quality, and from a very difficult beginning, it's Bill Buckley. And so I finish my remarks this evening with two quotes, both about the Duke of Wellington, which I think apply directly to Bill Buckley. The first, from a man named McGregor, who said this: there was in this Duke a benevolence of character of which I have observed him to be capable in so many instances, but which only those much near to him could know about. And William Napier, in his history of the war on the Peninsula, said about the Duke of Wellington, this history I dedicate to your grace, because I have served long enough under your command to know why the soldiers of the 10th Legion were attached to Caesar. That is how we feel that know him about Bill Buckley, and that is why we are grateful to you for spawning him, supporting him, and making it possible for his voice to be heard over this land and over the world.
Thank you, Rabbi Lowenstein. I may not have got it exactly right, but I still sleep better knowing you're in Switzerland. The next comes to us clearly tagged as representing the media. The influence that Bill has had on the media and vice versa through the years. This gentleman has become so familiar through television that it is supererogatory to introduce him to anybody at all. He is known all over America, favorably and well for the best of reasons, one of the finest reporters in the land. Come on up, Mike Wallace.
Thank you, Parson Rusher. You will forgive me, this really is an exercise in superfluity, and I'm serious about it. It's been very badly stage managed. I was planning to go out and play tennis this afternoon, and because I figured almost no one would show up to talk about Bill, I felt it was my duty to sit down and do a little research, and I spent a couple of hours doing it and typing out stuff, and then Keene comes up and makes every joke in the book about. Then Stanton Evans, my colleague from CBS. Incidentally, Stan, I would like to suggest that you use a little more of that approach on Spectrum. I have found what you have to say on Spectrum funny from time to time. But this is hilarious. And then Kissinger and... Listen, you talked about playing cleanup. Good Lord, there's nothing left to say. And that's what I shall be talking about. I had forgotten, until I started those 2 hours of research this afternoon, what a Neanderthal Bill Buckley really was. Before he decided to be palatable and gave up Gethsemane for Gestalt. There was a time when my friend here would have disdained being called respectable, before he was tamed by Allard Lowenstein and Abe Rosenthal. It was only 20 years ago that the public perception, and I know that you're only 17 years old, born in Sharon, but it was only 20 years ago that the public perception of a crowd like this would probably have been that you were mainly kooks, vaguely bigots, perhaps fascists. And then along came this gentleman to my right. Brilliant, good-looking, intolerant, dogmatic, and above all, rich. The Nelson Rockefeller of, it was he who bestowed upon, it was he really who bestowed upon all of you a patina of credibility. He too then was as wild as you would like to be. This precocious prophet of God and man at Yale, the enfant terrible who kept pushing his outrageous line, the man who would go any place, any time to talk to anyone, including me. Now, I remember the first time I saw him close up. I was doing a local television broadcast called Night Beat here on Channel 5 back in 1956. And it was not always easy to flush out willing quarries for those torture sessions that used to pass for interviews. Buckley was always available. I was never really quite sure why, Bill. I knew that you were greedy for publicity. But it wasn't only narcissism, I don't believe. I think that Bill Buckley had a notion, and like an itinerant preacher, he would go any place to preach it. He was an elitist, but he understood that sometimes you had to get down into the gutter to sell his brand of snake oil. Once on a television broadcast of memory called Author Meets the Critics, he got into a noisy debate with Jimmy Wexler of the New York Post about a book called USA Confidential. I think it was written by Lee Mortimer. He didn't like the book, but he was a realist. He defended it. And when he was asked how he could identify himself with that kind of gutter journalism, he said, look, I don't like it. I don't like the way the book is written any more than you do, but it's on our side. And anyway, you've got to write that way to reach a big public, which probably explains the success of his column. The fact is that he really was one of the most popular guests that we ever had on Night Beat. And what I liked about him, seriously, was that he was unfailingly courteous, only occasionally patronizing, and frequently understandable. We almost became a vaudeville team on Night Beat, but then he forsook me for Gore Vidal. I said earlier that I did some research this afternoon. Listen to what I came across. This is gospel. Listen to what I came across in the course of a couple of hours in my file cabinets. The Gospel according to Bill Buckley. This was back in 1958. Question by Wallace. Who are the serious, major, right-wing political leaders today? Buckley's answer. Senator Noland, Senator Bridges, Senator Bricker, Congressman Judd, And of course, there's a great deal of speculation, he said, about Vice President Nixon. What do you think he is, I asked. Said Buckley wistfully. Well, he told me recently that he regularly reads the National Review. What about intellectual leaders in the movement, I wanted to know. Names that we might recognize or names that we might not. Said Brother Buckley, a name like Gary Wills you have probably never heard of. He is 23 years old and a genius. He will have a profound impact on society. Next question. I asked him how we should act in relation to the Soviet Union. Answer, categorical. We should accept certain goals and prepare for those goals irrespective of cost. To list a simple program: liberate Albania, unify Korea, extirpate Soviet influence in Syria, unify Germany.
Never at a loss for a tough question.
I said, but Bill, you know as well as I do that there's no way successfully to liberate Albania, unify Germany, and unify Korea. Answer, you are a defeatist and I reject your pessimism. He is also the man who is reputed to have said, I will not turn my back on Spiro Agnew. Having said all that, I hasten to add that at a dinner party at the home of his friends Shirley and Dick Clerman a couple of years ago, I remember blurting to a stunned table full of limousine liberals that our dinner partner Buckley had probably accomplished far more of what he had set out to accomplish than had any of the rest of us around the table. They thought I'd taken leave of my senses. After all, how many legions has the National Review? Fact is, I was right. Sometimes he's been lonely. Sometimes he's been wrong. But always, always, he has grown. Always, he has been an unabashed patriot. Always, he has helped to make us rethink our premises. And he has surely helped to set the American agenda for the past quarter century. I confess that he has persuaded me, even me, to change my mind about more than one or two things, and I am proud to call him friend. So.
Now you see, aren't you glad you came and aren't you glad you waited? We now approach the climax of the evening. You have heard references, fleeting, glancing ones, to the influence, and it was a real influence, that Henry Kissinger over the years has had on Bill. It has not been total, I should tell you. Bill has never really, for example, bought, I think, the concept of détente. Now, what was it Orson Bean who defined détente as like going to a wife-swapping party and coming home alone? On the other hand, there's no question that Bill's convictions on the desirability of the Panama Canal Treaty are profound. I've never seen him more firmly convinced of anything unless it was the innocence of Edgar Smith. But now we've grated on him enough. It's time to hear from the guest of honor, What a pity we can't have, given some of the quotes we've heard this evening that Mike Wallace's research developed, can't have a debate between the old Bill Buckley and the new. That would be fun. Absent that, we'll hear a speech by the one we've got. To say that he needs no introduction to a YAF audience would be to win hands down the Platitude Trophy of 1977. Instead, I will merely say that we do not know what he will do in the future. No one can say, Bill himself cannot say, Pat cannot say, Priscilla cannot say, no one can say, least of all, I. But for the past, there is no doubt. I give you the chairman of the Allard Lowenstein chapter of the American Conservative Union, William F. Buckley, Jr.
Thank you, Bill. Ladies and gentlemen, Barry Farber, Abe Hirschberg, it appears to me that you have gone to very elaborate pains to abort a speech by me about the Panama Canal. On one point, I think there is near unanimity here tonight, namely that what you have heard is an improvement over what you would otherwise have heard. This has been an overwhelming experience. I'm reminded of Senator Goldwater when he delivered in London his first speech after his presidential campaign to the British Press Association, in preparation for which he read detailed accounts in the British press about himself. Gentlemen, he said, I didn't know until I read what you have written what a son of a bitch I was. I was greatly relieved to hear from Frank Donatelli yesterday that my old friend and colleague Bill Rusher would serve tonight as the master of ceremonies. I assumed he would bring down the gavel on the speakers whenever they strayed onto dangerous territory. But as you have seen, he failed us completely in taking preemptive action. He is a traditionalist in all matters, bringing us along tonight down the road to mutual assured destruction. I was delighted to meet Mr. Hyde for the first time. He is scheduled to appear on firing line a few weeks hence, where I promise to reciprocate all of his courtesies. It was a delight to see David Keene again. The last time I saw him was at National Review, where he arrived just about a year ago on a secret mission to inform me that he and his colleagues had decided to recommend Dick Schweiker as a running mate for Ronald Reagan. He whispered to me triumphantly that by so doing, Reagan would win 50 critical delegates at Kansas City. 50 delegates meant one delegate for each 2 points Senator Schweiker had scored on the ADA rating. Ronald Reagan reminded me after that episode of the bartender who demanded $1 before serving an obviously impecunious barfly a scotch and soda. The customer said, "I'll tell you what, will you give me a drink if I show you that I can bite one eye?" The bartender said, "Well, yes, he would," whereupon the customer removed a glass eye and put it triumphantly between his teeth. "Well," said the bartender, "you won that one fair and square," and poured him a scotch, after which the customer, wiping his lips, asked for another drink, saying, "Now, I bet you I can bite the other eye." The bartender knew that the man wasn't blind. He had seen him walk in, threading his way around the closely grouped tables. "Very well," he said, "go ahead." Whereupon the customer took out his false teeth, moved them up to his left eye, and closed them down. "Well," said the bartender, pouring the drink, "you won that one fair and square." "I'll tell you what," said the customer, wiping his lips. "See that silver bowl directly behind you there? I'll bet you I can urinate right over your head into it without laying a drop on you." The bartender, astonished, replied, "It's a bet." Whereupon, taking careful aim, the initial trajectory arced perfectly over the bartender's head for the first tense moment, after which the man, beginning to sweat, looked up sadly at the bartender and said resignedly, "Well, you can't win them all." Stan Evans is, of course, one of my oldest friends, though you will be forgiven if you did not glean that tonight. And one of my oldest colleagues. He reminded me years ago of a line Westbrook Pegler wrote reminiscing about the great populist demagogues of the 30s, Huey Long, Darrell L.K. Smith, and Father Coughlin. Pegler wrote first about Long, then about Smith, then about Father Coughlin. "It was Father Coughlin," said Pegler, "who said about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that liar, that cheat, that scoundrel." Pegler sighed on the printed page. "I wish I had said that." Well, it was Stan Evans who, at the previous convention 2 years ago, made the most memorable libertarian aphorism of our time. "Any country that can land a man on the moon, he said solemnly, can abolish the income tax." Speaking, as we were doing a moment ago, of Mr. Hyde, I'm reminded that that was what Mike Wallace trained himself to be when he began his career as the Grand Inquisitor of television journalism. His famous program, as he reminisced tonight, was called Night Beat, and he had 2 victims per night, 1 half hour each. Those were the days of Joe McCarthy, who, your teachers will have taught you, succeeded in silencing everyone in the Republic except your teachers. The first time I met Mike Wallace was the only time I ever saw him lose his poise, because the first guest of the hour was an aging actress who had played the personal maid of Scarlett O'Hara in the movie Gone with the Wind. Since Miss Butterfly McQueen was black and Southern, Mike assumed she would have all the conventional prejudices. And indeed, she performed excellently until the closing moments of the program, when Mike leaned over to her and asked her, "Butterfly, what do you pray for at night?" Expecting to hear her say, "A higher minimum wage, the deconstitutionalization of the poll tax." "Well, Mr. Wallace," said Butterfly, "every night I go on my knees and I thank God for J. Edgar Hoover and for Joe McCarthy for looking out for this great country." There was only one other occasion I can remember on television to rank with it. It was the expression on the face of Larry Spivak, who had saved his polemical haymaker for the last 30 seconds of Meet the Press. His guest that afternoon 25 years ago was the man Spivak was known to hate most in all America. So exactly 30 seconds before the end of the hour, Spivak looked him square in the face, and he said, "Senator Bilbo, how do you account for the fact that last week your colleague, Senator Robert Taft, said that unquestionably you were the worst senator ever to have been elected in American history?" "Don't you understand, Mr. Spivak?" Senator Bilbo explained patiently. "Senator Taft is a communist." The last 5 seconds of the hour showed only the speechless face of Larry Spivak. If I were roasting Mike Wallace, I would say that for a while there was a rumor that he once voted Republican. But to spread such a rumor about somebody at CBS would, of course, smack of McCarthyism. Mike Wallace, notwithstanding what they say about him at dinner parties in New York City, has never taken leave of his senses, nor is he ever likely to lose his place in my esteem and affection. Now, Lowenstein, as I think many of you know, is my personal Panama Canal. I was asked point blank last fall at a press conference why I had endorsed Lowenstein for Congress. I replied, pure self-indulgence. Every man should be permitted at least one heresy. I have 1.5. Al Lowenstein and the decriminalization of pot. One of the most endearing things about Al, apart from his genuine and consistent devotion to human rights, even on the other side of the Iron Curtain, is that he is incapable of meeting any appointment. One wishes that he had been incapable of meeting his appointments to vote while in Congress. Now, the other day at his swearing in at the United Nations, at which, by swearing to uphold the Charter of the United Nations, he implicitly consecrated himself to a subversive career within the United Nations. He told me he was looking forward to our meeting the next day at 11 o'clock. So was I said. However, he said, he didn't see how that meeting would be possible. Why not? I said. Oh, because he said at 11 o'clock he would be in Atlanta. We both mused over this problem, which was metaphysical in form. Arriving just 1 minute late for the train, a G.D.H. Cole on one occasion sat down at the railroad station in Oxford to wait disconsolately 2 hours for the next train, when unaccountably the Trans-Island Express to London stopped. He calmly opened the carriage door and stepped inside and opened a book. The train started up again, roared off, and in a few moments an officious conductor appeared and addressed him, saying, "Sir, this train doesn't stop here." "I know," said Professor Cole, "that I'm not in it." It is a triumph of scheduling that delivered Al here tonight. It is a joy to be in his company. You can know from having heard him how grateful I am to him for being here and for saying what he did. I first met Henry Kissinger in 1954, 6 years before the founding of Young Americans for Freedom. He negotiated with me to write an article for the academic quarterly he was then editing called Confluence. I went on to write it on the subject of loyalty and security procedures in government. It was never published. I assume on the grounds that it was too McCarthyite in tendency. 20 years later, as Secretary of State, he confided to me, after serving 6 years, that he finally knew what was wrong with Joe McCarthy. He hadn't gone far enough. That crack, of course, is solidly in the American tradition of the tall tale, like détente. My disagreements with some of his policies are public, but I have never doubted his devotion to the cause of the West, or ceased to wonder at his virtuosity. It is almost unparalleled in American history that the approval of a former Secretary of State should be so assiduously cultivated by an administration of the opposing political party. His personal constituency is not only vast, but slavish, putting one to mind of the Duke of Wellington, whose name has been brought up before, when his mistress, Mrs. Arbuthnot, died. The Iron Duke went tearfully to her funeral and was primarily consoled by the whispered condolences of Mr. Arbuthnot, who put his arm around the Duke and said, "Do not grieve, Your Grace, I shall marry again." Diplomatic crises, one sometimes suspects, are created in order to occupy Henry Kissinger. I know that everyone in this room joins me in offering to help him solve them. He can call us any time of the day or night to collect. And speaking personally, I'm happy to take the opportunity to register for him my continuing affection and regard. Jeff Kane has received the tribute he is due. A word of thanks should be given to Frank Donatelli, for whose good-humored and resourceful planning of this convention we are so greatly indebted, myself in particular. I know that you will miss him and wish him well in his legal career, as also his successor, Ron Robinson. As to John Buckley, I will gladly accept the suggestion by Bill Rusher that I change my name to William F. Solzhenitsyn. The only problem is then, how could I get through to Henry Kissinger? To your new chairman, cousin John, I also wish every success, supremely confident that he will meet with it. It will perhaps embarrass him, but after all, the format of the evening is propitious for embarrassment. If I divulged to you that when he was 12 years old, he confided to me in New Orleans that he intended to be President of the United States. I there and then pledged him my own vote and have never wavered in my conviction that he is using the chairmanship of Young Americans for Freedom as a stepping stone to the presidency. I can only say that I find this altogether appropriate. Perhaps in the generations to come, it will be everywhere assumed that anyone so right-minded and so gifted as to be elected by Young Americans for Freedom as their chairman is presumptively headed for the White House. When John makes it, I hope he will not forget this evening. I certainly shan't. Perhaps on the 20th anniversary of this night, we can all meet again at the White House. Congressman Hyde serving as Secretary of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Bill Rusher to advise us that John's incumbency is surely the last gasp of the Republican Party. Thereupon empathically contributing his own last gasp. Stan Evans will head up a brand new cabinet role as Secretary for Dissolution. Mike Wallace will be the White House exegete, and we promise him material for 60 minutes of every hour. Al Lowenstein, who arrived a day late for the inaugural, will serve as International Crisis Coordinator, and Henry Kissinger and I will announce our retirement and stroll off together to Olympus, our unsubsidized old people's home. But my prayers will be with you then, even as they are with you today.